The child's shallow gasps echo in the hospital ward. It's 1931, and polio has claimed another victim, a small body, lifeless except for the faint rise and fall of their chest. Doctors scramble, their tools useless against the relentless virus that paralyzes not just limbs, but lungs. Parents weep outside the doors, their hope dwindling with each passing second. Then, a nurse wheels in a hulking contraption. It looks like a coffin, long, metallic, and cold. The child is carefully slid inside, their tiny head poking out from a rubber-sealed opening. The machine hisses to life. A rhythmic whooshing begins. With every pulse, the machine forces air into the child's lungs, pushing against the paralysis. In moments, a miracle unfolds. The child gasps, their cheeks flush with life. Relief washes over the room. But this miracle comes with a shadow. The inventor of this machine, a genius named Philip Drinker, created it to save lives. Yet, while his invention brought breath to the dying, it left him gasping for recognition. What curse followed Drinker and his iron lung? How did the machine that saved thousands destroy its creator? This is the untold story of betrayal, innovation, and tragedy. By the early 20th century, polio epidemics gripped entire cities with fear. The disease struck without warning, often during the warm months. Pools were closed, schools shuttered, and children were kept inside as parents prayed their family would be spared. What made polio so insidious wasn't just the paralysis, it was its ability to turn modern progress against itself. As sanitation improved, fewer infants were exposed to the virus early in life, when they could gain mild immunity through maternal antibodies. Instead, they encountered it later, when the virus's effects were far more devastating. The public watched helplessly as the numbers climbed. In 1916, New York City alone saw over 9,000 cases, and by the 1940s, polio had become an epidemic of national proportions. Hospitals overflowed with children who could no longer walk, and the worst cases couldn't even breathe. There was no cure. For families, each cough, each fever was a potential death sentence. And for those who survived, the fear of permanent disability lingered. Society needed a solution, and fast. But what happens when the solution comes with its own unexpected cost? That answer lay in the hands of a quiet inventor named Philip Drinker. In a quiet laboratory at Harvard University in the 1920s, Philip Drinker and Louis Agassiz Shaw worked late into the night. Drinker was a man of quiet demeanor and sharp intellect. He wasn't interested in fame or wealth. He sought solutions. Practical answers to real-world problems. His expertise in industrial hygiene had already earned him respect, but it was a single visit to a hospital ward that would change his life forever. Drinker witnessed a scene he couldn't forget. A young girl gasping for air as polio paralyzed her lungs. Her tiny chest heaved, struggling to keep her alive. The doctor stood by, helpless, as she slipped away. The experience haunted him. At the time, no medical device could mimic the natural process of breathing. When the virus attacked the muscles that controlled the lungs, death was almost inevitable. Drinker became obsessed with finding a way to save these patients. Drawing inspiration from his work with pressurized chambers, Drinker began designing what would become the first iron lung. The machine was rudimentary at first, a large metal cylinder powered by a vacuum pump. He tested it on lab animals, then on himself, lying motionless in the claustrophobic chamber as air was mechanically forced in and out of his lungs. In 1928, the moment of truth arrived. An 8-year-old girl, on the brink of death, was placed inside the machine. As the iron lung began its rhythmic pumping, color returned to her face. She lived. Word spread quickly. Drinker became a hero, celebrated in medical journals and newspapers. Hospitals clamored for the machine, desperate to save the lives of their most vulnerable patients. For a brief moment, it seemed as though Drinker's invention would change the world, and it did. But behind the triumph, cracks began to form. The iron lung was expensive, massive, and difficult to produce. Rival inventors were watching, eager to capitalize on his creation. And for Drinker, this was only the beginning of a battle that would cost him everything. As the iron lung gained popularity, it became a symbol of hope. By the 1930s, hospitals across the United States scrambled to acquire the machine. Entire wards were filled with rows of children and adults encased in the devices, their lives sustained by the steady, mechanical whoosh of air being pushed in and out. But while the world hailed the iron lung as a miracle, Philip Drinker faced mounting challenges. The machine was extraordinarily expensive to produce, and only the wealthiest hospitals could afford it. Families desperate to save loved ones often found themselves trapped by the staggering costs. John Haven Emerson was the next to leave his mark on the iron lung's development. A talented inventor with a sharp eye for efficiency and profit, Emerson unveiled a game-changing design in 1931. This design was a more affordable, streamlined version of the iron lung. It had portholes for easier access to patients and was significantly cheaper to produce. The public embraced the new design, but Drinker was livid. Drinker and Harvard University filed a lawsuit accusing Emerson of infringing on their patents. The court battle was intense, drawing public attention to the cutthroat world of medical innovation. But in a devastating twist, Emerson won. The court ruled that many of the technologies Drinker had used in the iron lung were pre-existing and therefore not eligible for patent protection. The implications were enormous. Not only did Drinker lose his patents, but the ruling also meant that anyone could now manufacture iron lungs without paying him royalties. Emerson himself would famously declare that life-saving technologies should not be controlled by a single inventor. While Emerson's victory was seen as a win for public access, it was a crushing blow for Drinker. Financially drained from the legal battle and emotionally devastated, he watched as his invention, the machine he had risked everything to create, was mass-produced by others. His name began to fade, replaced by those who profited from his work. As the years went on, the irony became painfully clear. The iron lung saved lives, but its success left its creator gasping for air in a world that had moved on. Philip Drinker once stood at the pinnacle of medical innovation, but the betrayal he faced, by the legal system, his rivals, and even the public, pushed him into a slow descent. After losing the patent battle to Emerson, Drinker struggled to keep his work afloat. The profits from the iron lung, which should have secured his financial future, evaporated. Rival manufacturers flooded the market with cheaper versions, each bearing subtle improvements that overshadowed Drinker's original design. The medical community, once so eager to celebrate his invention, turned its attention to newer, shinier developments. The ultimate blow came when Harvard, Drinker's academic home, distanced itself from the controversy. Funding dried up, and Drinker's career, once defined by groundbreaking success, became marked by obscurity. He moved on to other projects, but none gained the acclaim of the iron lung. Meanwhile, the patients he sought to save lived confined within the machines that had defined his life. Some stayed inside iron lungs for decades, relying on the rhythmic compression of air to survive. Their lives, though extended, were often filled with isolation and despair. Iron lung wards became grim, buzzing monuments to the disease and to Drinker's forgotten contributions. For Drinker, the greatest betrayal came not from rivals, but from time itself. The rise of the polio vaccine in the 1950s heralded the end of the iron lung's dominance. As cases of paralysis dwindled, so too did the need for the cumbersome devices. By the time Drinker passed away in 1972, his name had largely vanished from public memory. But for a small, forgotten group, the iron lung was still a lifeline. These were the patients for whom the vaccine had arrived too late, survivors of the polio epidemics who lived every moment reliant on the mechanical lungs that encased their bodies. Some adapted to their new lives with extraordinary courage, even finding ways to advocate for greater accessibility and disability rights. Today, only a handful of iron lungs remain in use, preserved more as historical artifacts than medical tools. Their hulking frames stand as silent witnesses to the lives they saved and the inventor they forgot. Today, we remember the vaccine as the hero of the polio epidemic, while the iron lung gathers dust in museums, a relic of a dark chapter in medical history. But behind that relic lies a forgotten name, a forgotten sacrifice. Drinker's life reminds us that progress often comes at a price. For every celebrated innovator, there are countless others whose contributions go unnoticed, their sacrifices overshadowed by the very systems they sought to improve. So let this story not just honor the machine, but the man behind it. A man who gave breath to others, even as his own voice was silenced. Let us remember Philip Drinker, not as a footnote, but as the quiet genius who taught us the power and price of saving lives. Ready for more mind-blowing stories? Hit that subscribe button to explore the fascinating world of obscure inventions and technologies. Thanks for watching. Until next time.